Jake Martinez stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the massive buildings of Centauri Prime. The Galactic Academy stretched across the horizon like a small city. Its towers reached toward the purple sky, and strange lights flickered. In windows that were shaped like triangles, circles, and other odd forms. Jake had never seen anything like it. The air smelled different here. It was clean, but had a sweet scent that reminded him of flowers he couldn't name. 2 suns hung in. The sky, one bright yellow and one pale blue. The ground beneath his feet felt solid, but it had a slight bounce to it, like walking on a thick carpet. Human Jake Martinez? A voice asked behind him, Dot. Jake turned around and came face to face with something that looked like a giant insect walking. On 2 legs? It was as tall as he was, with 4 arms and large compound eyes that reflected the sunlight. Its skin was a deep green color with golden markings across its chest. Yes, that's me, Jake said, trying not to stare. I am Coordinator Vextil of the Vorthic people. I will show you to your living space and help you begin your studies here. The insect-like being spoke through a small device attached to its throat. The words came out perfectly clear, but Jake could hear clicking sounds underneath Dot as they walked through the academy grounds. Jake saw students from many different worlds. Some looked almost human, but had blue or silver skin. Others were covered in fur and walked on 4 legs. A few were so strange that Jake couldn't figure out how they moved or what they were. The Galactic Academy is home to students from 53 different worlds, Vextil explained as they walked. We have been the finest school for learning about different species for over 300 years. You are the first human to study. Here. Why is that? Jake asked. Vextil's compound eyes turned toward him. Your people were only discovered 20 years ago. The Galactic Council needed time to decide if humans were ready for this level of education. They stopped in front of a building that looked like it was made of crystal. The walls were clear, but Jake could see that they were thick and strong. This is where you will live, Vextil said. Your room is on the 3rd level. Other species live here too, but each room is made to fit the needs of different beings. Jake's room was simple but comfortable. The bed was the right size for a human, and there was a desk where he could study. A window looked out over a garden filled with plants from many different worlds. Some of the plants moved on their own, reaching toward the light of the 2 suns. Classes begin tomorrow morning, Vextil said. Your first class will be Advanced Predator Studies with Professor Kylix. This is considered one of the most important classes at the Academy. What do we study in that class? Jake asked. The most dangerous hunting species in the galaxy. Students learn how these creatures hunt, what makes them successful, and how other species can protect themselves. Vextil paused. It will be interesting to see how a human does in this class. That evening, Jake ate dinner in the main dining hall. The room was enormous, with tables arranged in groups based on species. He noticed that most students sat with others who looked like them. The insect-like Vorthic sat together at tables near the windows. Tall, thin beings with pale skin, and large eyes gathered near the center of the room. In one corner, reptilian creatures with thick scales and sharp teeth talked. Loudly among themselves, Jake got his food from a machine that scanned him and provided a meal suitable for human biology. It tasted like chicken and vegetables, though. He knew it probably wasn't either. He looked around for somewhere to sit and noticed that several groups of students were watching him. You must be the human, said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see one of the reptilian beings from the corner table. It was bigger than Jake, with dark green scales and yellow eyes. Its teeth were clearly designed for tearing meat. I'm Jake, he said. I am Zextar of the Krafen Empire. We are the greatest warriors in this part of the galaxy. Zexstar looked Jake up and down. "You look very small for a predator species. Are you sure you belong in advanced predator studies?" "I guess we'll find out tomorrow," Jake said. Zexstar laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Yes, we will. I hope you can keep up." He walked back to his table where other Cruthin students were watching and making similar grinding sounds. Jake found an empty table and sat down to eat alone. As he ate, he watched the other students. The Vorthik moved with quick, precise motions. The pale beings ate very little and seemed to communicate without speaking. The Crothin were loud and aggressive, often showing their teeth when they talked. The end of dinner, a small group of students approached his table. The one in front looked almost human, but had light blue skin and silver hair. Her eyes were large and kind. "Hello," she said in a soft voice. "I am Lyra of the Zelani people. We wanted to welcome you to the academy." "Thank you," Jake said. "That's very nice of you." "We have heard about your species," said another student, one of the insect-like Vorthik. "I am Kixnol. We understand that humans are very young as a space-traveling species." "That's true," Jake said. "We only developed faster than light travel about 30 years ago." Lyra smiled. "That must make everything here very new and strange for you. If you need help understanding anything, please ask us. The academy can be difficult for students who aren't used to learning alongside so many different species." Jake thanked them, and they returned to their tables. He finished his meal and went back to his room. As he prepared for sleep, he thought about what tomorrow would bring. Advanced predator studies sounded serious, and he wondered what kind of dangerous creatures they would learn about. He looked out his window at the garden below. In the light of the 2 moons that orbited Centauri Prime, he could see some of the plants moving like slow dancers. Everything here was so different from Earth. The other students seemed nice enough, though some were clearly more friendly than others. Jake remembered what his sister Lisa had said before he left Earth. "You're representing all of humanity up there," she had told him. "Show them what humans can do." He hoped he wouldn't disappoint her or his species. Tomorrow, he would begin learning about the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. He wondered if any of them were as dangerous as some of the creatures that had once lived on Earth. Humans had stories about facing down giant bears, hunting massive mammoths, and surviving attacks from saber-toothed cats. But those were just stories from long ago. Jake was just a college student from California who had been chosen for this program because of his good grades in biology and anthropology. He didn't feel particularly dangerous or predatory. He just wanted to learn and maybe make some friends. Among the stars, as he drifted off to sleep, Jake didn't notice the small device attached to his window that was recording everything about his first day at the academy. Somewhere in the administration building, Professor Kylix was reviewing the data and preparing for tomorrow's class. The real test was about to begin. Jake woke up to the sound of a soft chime coming from somewhere in his room. The 2 suns of Centauri Prime were already rising, casting strange colored shadows through his window. He got dressed in the simple clothes that had been provided for him and made his way to the dining hall for breakfast. The breakfast machine gave him something that looked like eggs and toast, though it tasted a bit different from what he was used to. He ate quickly, noticing that other students were already heading to their first classes of the day. Following the directions on his class schedule, Jake found his way to the Advanced Predator Studies classroom. The room was large and circular, with seats arranged in rising rows so everyone could see the center. Strange displays and screens covered the walls, showing images of various alien creatures. Professor Kylix was already at the front of the room when Jake arrived. Like Coordinator Vextil, he was one of the insect-like Vorthik, but larger and with more elaborate golden markings on his green shell. His 4 arms moved independently, as he prepared materials for the class. "Welcome, students," Professor Kylix said as the last few beings entered the room. "This is Advanced Predator Studies, where we examine the most successful hunting species in our galaxy. You are here because you have shown excellence in your previous studies." Jake looked around at his classmates. There were 12 students total, including himself. Zextar sat near the front, his reptilian form taking up more space than the other students. Lyra sat with 2 other Zelani students, their blue skin almost glowing in the classroom lights. Kixino and several other Vorthik were spread throughout the room, their compound eyes reflecting the displays on the walls. "Let us begin with a simple question," Professor Kylix continued. "What makes a predator successful?" Zextar raised one of his clawed hands immediately. "Strength and natural weapons," he said. "The ability to overpower prey through superior physical force." "A good answer," the professor said. "What else?" One of the Vorthik students, not Kixino, clicked rapidly before speaking. "Intelligence and planning. The ability to track prey and predict their movements." "Excellent. Other thoughts?" Lyra raised her hand hesitantly. "Speed and stealth. Being able to catch prey before they can escape." "All correct answers," Professor Kylix said. "Now, let me show you some examples of the most successful predators in our galaxy." The room darkened and a holographic display appeared in the center. It showed a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a wolf, but the size of a small building. Its 8 legs ended in razor-sharp claws, and its multiple eyes glowed red in the display. "This is a Void Stalker from Kepler 442b," the professor explained. "They hunt in the vacuum of space, using their natural ability to survive without atmosphere. They can track the heat signatures of spacecraft from millions of kilometers away." The students watched in fascination as the display showed the creature, leaping from asteroid to asteroid, moving through space like it was swimming through water. "Note the natural adaptations," Professor Kylix continued. "Razor claws for gripping, multiple eyes for tracking in 3 dimensions, and internal organs that can function in 0 atmosphere. Evolution has created the perfect space predator." The display changed to show another creature. This one looked like a massive snake, but with dozens of mouths along its body, each filled with spinning teeth. "The razor maws of the Andorian belt," the professor said. "They burrow through solid rock and can sense vibrations from surface movements up to 50 kilometers away. Their multiple feeding mouths allow them to consume prey much larger than themselves." Zextar leaned forward in his seat. "How do beings protect themselves from such creatures?" "An excellent question," Professor Kylix replied. "Most species avoid their territories entirely. The few that must travel through their hunting grounds use specialized technology and extreme caution." Jake listened to all of this with growing interest. The creatures were fascinating, but he couldn't help thinking about predators from Earth. These alien creatures were impressive, but they seemed to rely mostly on physical advantages, size, natural weapons, or special abilities. Professor continued showing examples for the next hour. There was a creature that could become invisible, another that could fly through solid matter, and one that could split itself into dozens of smaller versions. "Now," Professor Kylix said, "let us discuss the hunting strategies of the Krathen. People, since we have several representatives with us today." Zextar straightened proudly as the display showed images of his species in their natural environment. The Krathen were clearly built for hunting, powerful muscles, sharp claws, and teeth designed for tearing flesh. "The Krathen are apex predators on their homeworld," the professor explained. "They hunt in small groups and use their natural strength to overpower prey. Their thick scales provide protection, and their claws can tear through most materials. We are the greatest hunters in our part of the galaxy," Zextar said proudly. No prey can escape us once we begin the hunt. Some of the other students nodded respectfully. The Krathen had a reputation as fierce warriors, and their planet was known for its dangerous wildlife. What about the humans? Asked one of the Vorthik. Students. They are listed as a predator species in the Galactic database. All eyes turned to Jake, who suddenly felt very uncomfortable. Professor Kylix looked at him with what might have been curiosity. It was hard to tell with the compound. Eyes? Humans are. An interesting case, the professor said carefully. They have no natural weapons, no enhanced senses, and no special physical abilities. Yet they managed to become the dominant species on their planet. How is that possible? Lyra asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. Jake felt like he should say something, but he wasn't sure what. We use tools, he said finally, and we work together. Zexstar made that grinding sound that was Krathen laughter. Tools are for species too weak to hunt properly. A real predator uses what nature provided. Several other students seemed to agree with this. Even Lyra, who had been kind to him, looked at Jake with something like pity. Humans are very new to space travel, Kixnell said in what he probably thought was a helpful tone. They haven't had time to evolve proper hunting adaptations. They probably survived through hiding and scavenging, rather than true predation. That's not. Jake started to say, then stopped. How could he explain that humans had hunted creatures much larger than themselves? That they had driven entire species to extinction not through superior strength, but through persistence and intelligence? Professor Kylix seemed to notice Jake's discomfort. We will have many opportunities to discuss different hunting strategies throughout this course, he said. For now, let us continue with our survey of galactic predators. The rest of the class focused on creatures from various worlds. Jake took notes, but he found himself thinking about the animals that had once lived on Earth. Humans had faced down cave bears, twice their size, hunted woolly mammoths with nothing but spears and teamwork, and somehow managed to survive ice. Ages and natural disasters that had wiped out much larger and stronger species. When class ended, Jake gathered his materials and started to leave. As he reached the door, he heard Zexstar talking to some of the other students. I don't understand why they allowed a human into this class, the Krathen was saying. They're clearly not real predators. Look at him. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor. He's probably never killed anything in his life. Maybe it's some kind of experiment, suggested one of the Vorthik students, to see how a prey species reacts to learning about real predators. Jake kept walking, but the words stung. He had never thought of humans as particularly dangerous, but he had also never thought of them as prey animals. Back on Earth, humans were definitely at the top of the food chain, even if they used technology to get their dot. As he walked back to his room, Jake passed the Academy's library. Through the large windows, he could see students from various species studying together. He decided to go inside and do some research. The library's computer system was more advanced than anything on Earth. Jake asked it to show him information about Earth's extinct megafauna, the large animals that had lived on his planet thousands of years ago. The display showed impressive creatures. Giant ground sloths, the size of elephants, saber-toothed cats with fangs longer than knives, cave bears that stood 12 feet tall, and mammoths covered in thick fur. All of them were gone now, and humans had played a role in most of their extinctions. Jake studied the information for a long time. Humans might not have natural weapons, but they had something else, the ability to adapt, to plan, and to work together in ways that no other Earth species could match. Maybe that was worth something, even if his classmates couldn't see it yet. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's first day in Advanced Predator Studies. Each class followed a similar pattern. Professor Kylix would present information about dangerous creatures from across the galaxy, and the students would discuss hunting, strategies, and survival tactics. Jake had learned about acid-spitting creatures from the Vega system, pack hunters that could phase through solid matter, and flying predators with wingspans measured in kilometers. During these discussions, Jake mostly stayed quiet. Whenever he tried to contribute, his classmates would politely listen and then continue as if he hadn't spoken. Zexstar had stopped making direct comments about human weakness, but Jake could see the amusement in the Krathen's yellow eyes whenever the topic of natural weapons came up. Who was always kind to him, seemed to treat him like a younger student who needed extra help understanding the material. She would explain basic concepts to him that he already understood, speaking slowly as if he might not be able to follow along. Today, Professor Kylix announced as the class settled into their seats, we will be conducting a practical examination. The students looked up with interest. They had been studying theory for weeks, but this was their first hands-on exercise. You will be placed in a simulated environment where you must survive an encounter with an unknown predator species. The professor continued, this exercise will test everything you have learned about predator behavior, survival strategies, and species cooperation. The professor led them to a different room, one that Jake had never seen before. It was completely empty, except for a large circular platform in the center. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in a material that looked like black glass. Step onto the platform, Professor Kylix instructed. The simulation will begin once you are all in position. The 12 students gathered on the platform. Jake found himself standing between Kixenal and one of the other Zelani students. Zexstar positioned himself at what he clearly considered the front of the group, ready to take charge. Remember, the professor said from outside the simulation chamber, this is a Class A galactic predator scenario. These are creatures capable of hunting and killing members of any species represented in this room. Work together, stay alive, and try to learn something about your opponent. The lights dimmed, and suddenly Jake felt like he was standing in a completely different place. They were in a dense forest under a dark sky. Tall trees stretched overhead, their branches forming a thick canopy that blocked out most of the light. The air was humid and warm, filled with the sounds of insects and distant animal calls. The ground beneath their feet was soft with fallen leaves and moss. Incredible, breathed Lyra. It feels completely real. The Academy's simulation technology is the best in the galaxy, Kixenal said, his compound eyes scanning their surroundings. But we must remember that this is still a test. Somewhere in this forest is a predator that wants to kill us. Zexstar stepped forward, his claws extending slightly. Stay behind me, he told the group. Krathen are natural warriors. I will protect you from whatever creature they have programmed. The group began moving through the forest, with Zexstar in the lead and the others following in a loose formation. Jake stayed toward the back, but he was paying careful attention to their surroundings. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't quite identify what it was. After about 10 minutes of walking, they heard their first sign of the predator. A low howling sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Pack hunters, Kixenal observed. Multiple creatures coordinating their attack. How many? Asked Lyra, her voice showing the first signs of fear. Hard to tell, Zexstar replied, but it doesn't matter. Whatever they are, they haven't faced a Krathen warrior before. Jake was studying the ground as they walked. There were tracks in the soft earth, not just from their group, but from other creatures. The tracks were strange, showing what looked like large paws with long claws. But the spacing suggested something that moved differently than any earth animal he knew. More howling echoed through the trees, closer this time. The sound seemed to surround them, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. "We should find higher ground," suggested one of the Vorthik students. "Get a better view of our surroundings." "No," Zextar said firmly. "Higher ground means being exposed. We stay in the forest where I can use my natural camouflage." Jake looked at the Krathen's dark green scales and wondered what kind of forest Zextar was used to hunting in. The colors here were different, more browns and deep greens, with patches of lighter moss. Zextar would actually stand out quite a bit. The howling came again, much closer. This time, Jake could hear movement in the underbrush around them. Whatever was out there, it was getting ready to attack. "Form a defensive circle," Zextar ordered. Back to back, everyone watch a different direction. The students arranged themselves as instructed, but Jake could see that most of them were terrified. The Zelani were prey animals by nature, and even the intellectual Vorthik seemed overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation. Only Zextar appeared confident, and Jake was starting to think that confidence might be misplaced. A branch snapped, somewhere to their left, then another to their right. Whatever was hunting them was moving closer, staying just out of sight. "There," whispered Lyra, pointing to a gap between two large trees. "I saw something moving." Jake looked where she was pointing, but he was also paying attention to other things. The pattern of the sounds, the way the forest had gone quiet, except for their breathing, and the subtle signs that something large had passed through this area. Suddenly, there was a rush of movement from 3 different directions at once. Dark shapes burst from the underbrush, creatures that looked like a cross between wolves and large cats, but with 6 legs and glowing blue eyes. They were bigger than earth wolves, with sleek black fur and claws that looked like they could tear through metal. Zextar roared and charged at the nearest creature, his own claws extended, but the creature was faster than he expected. It dodged. His attack encircled around, while its packmates moved to flank the group. The students scattered in panic. Lyra screamed as one of the creatures leaped toward her. 2 of the Vorthik tried to climb the nearest tree, but their movements were too slow. The predators were everywhere, moving with coordination that showed intelligence and planning. Jake found himself separated from the others, facing one of the creatures alone. It crouched low, preparing to spring, its blue eyes locked on his. But instead of panicking like the others, Jake felt something different, a calmness that came from somewhere deep inside. He started moving sideways, not directly away from the creature, but at an angle. The creature followed his movement, but Jake could see confusion in its posture. This wasn't how prey was supposed to behave. Jake picked up a fallen branch without taking his eyes off the predator. The creature tensed, ready to attack, but Jake wasn't where it expected him to be. He had continued moving, putting a large tree between himself and the predator while keeping the branch ready as a weapon. Around him, his classmates were in chaos. Zextar was fighting bravely, but was clearly outmatched by creatures that were faster and more agile than anything on his homeworld. The Vorthik were trying to use their intelligence to analyze the situation, but they were too panicked to think clearly. The Zelani were running in pure terror. Jake could see the pattern of the attack now. The creatures weren't just randomly aggressive. They were hurting the students, driving them toward a specific area where more predators were probably waiting. It was a sophisticated hunting strategy that required planning and communication. But Jake had an advantage that none of his classmates possessed. He had grown up hearing stories about human ancestors who had faced similar situations, outnumbered, outmatched physically, but still capable of survival through intelligence and stubbornness. He started moving with purpose, no longer just trying to avoid the creature that was stalking him. Instead, he began working his way toward his scattered classmates, using the trees and terrain to his advantage. The predators were focused on their individual targets and hadn't expected their prey to start coordinating a response. Jake reached. Lyra first. She was backed against a large tree, frozen with fear as one of the creatures slowly approached her. Jake threw his branch hard, striking the predator in the side. It wasn't enough to seriously hurt the creature, but it was enough to get its attention. "This way," Jake called to Lyra, already moving toward where he had seen Kixino last. The predator turned toward Jake, but he was already gone, using the forest terrain in ways that his classmates hadn't thought of. He wasn't trying to fight the creatures directly. That would be suicide. Instead, he was starting to turn the hunt around, making the predators react to him rather than the other way around. For the first time since the simulation began, Jake Martinez was no longer acting like prey. Jake moved through the forest with growing confidence, but his classmates were still in panic. He could hear Zexstar roaring somewhere to his left, the sound mixing with the snarls of the pack hunters. Other students were crying out in fear as the creatures continued their coordinated attack, but Jake was no longer thinking like a victim. As he helped Lyra move away from immediate danger, his mind was working on a larger problem. These creatures were smart, but they were following patterns, and patterns could be predicted. "Jake, what are you doing?" Lyra gasped as he led her through a dense section of underbrush. "We need to find somewhere to hide." "Hiding won't work," Jake said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "They can track us by scent and sound. We need to change the game." He could see Kixinol about 30 meters away, backed against a fallen log while one of the predators circled him. The Vorthik was trying to use his analytical mind to find a solution, but terror was making it hard for him to think clearly. Jake picked up several stones from the ground, weighing them in his hand. Then he threw one hard and accurate, striking the predator menacing Kixinol right in the head. The creature yelped and spun around, looking for the source of the attack. "Over here," Jake called to Kixinol, then immediately moved to a different position. The predator charged toward where Jake's voice had come from, but he was no longer there. Instead, Jake was circling around, gathering his scattered classmates while the creatures tried to figure out what had changed. "How are you doing this?" Kixinol asked when Jake reached him. The Vorthik's compound eyes were wide with amazement. "You're moving like ... like a predator." "Stay close to me," Jake said, "and help me get to the others." They found 2 more Vorthik students hiding behind a large boulder. Jake could see that one of them was injured, claw marks across his shell where one of the predators had caught him. But the wounds weren't fatal, which told Jake something important about these creatures. "They're not trying to kill us," he sighed, his voice thoughtful. "What do you mean?" Lyra asked. "They're attacking us. They're hunting us, but look at the damage they've done. Kixinol's friend there is hurt, but not dead. If these creatures wanted to kill us, we'd all be dead already." Jake was starting to understand the true nature of the test. This wasn't about survival against mindless beasts. This was about learning to think like both predator and prey, to understand the complex dynamics of a hunt. A howl echoed through the forest, and Jake heard something new in the sound. It was a signal, calling the pack together for a coordinated attack. They were preparing for something bigger. "We need to move now," Jake said. "Everyone stay together. Follow my lead and do exactly what I tell you." "Why should we follow you?" demanded one of the Vorthik. "You're just a human. You don't have any hunting experience." Jake looked at him steadily. "Because I'm the only one here who's figured out how to stop running." He led the group through the forest, but not randomly. Jake was reading the terrain, looking for advantages. He found what he was looking for in a small clearing where a stream ran between 2 hills. The ground was rocky here, which would make it harder for the creatures to approach silently. "Form a circle again," Jake instructed. "But this time, we're not just defending. We're going to fight back." "With what?" Zexstar demanded. The Krathan warrior had found his way to their group, his scales showing several scratches from his encounters with the predators. "We have no weapons." Jake gestured to the ground around them. We have rocks, sticks, and terrain. More importantly, we have numbers and intelligence. He quickly explained his plan. The creatures hunted as a pack, which meant they coordinated their attacks. But if the students could break that coordination, they could turn the predator's own strategy against them. When they attack, they'll come from multiple directions, Jake said. But they'll still need to communicate with each other. Watch for the lead predator. It will be giving signals to the others. How do you know all this? Lyra asked. Jake paused, thinking about how to explain. Humans. We've been prey before. But we've also been hunters. We understand both sides. The howling came again, closer now. Through the trees, Jake could see movement as the pack positioned itself around their clearing. There were at least 6 of the creatures, maybe more. Remember, Jake said quietly, they expect us to panic and scatter. When they charge, stay together and focus on the one giving orders. The attack came all at once. Dark shapes burst from the forest in a coordinated rush, their blue eyes glowing in the dim light. The students started to scatter instinctively, but Jake's voice cut through their panic. Hold position. Watch the big one on the left. Jake had spotted the pack leader, larger than the others, with distinctive white markings on its chest. It was hanging back slightly, using posture and sounds to direct the other predators. Instead of running, Jake grabbed a large rock and threw it hard at the pack leader. His aim was perfect, striking the creature in the shoulder and causing it to stumble. Immediately, the coordination of the attack faltered as the other predators looked to their leader for guidance. Now, Jake shouted, drive them back. What happened next shocked everyone, including Jake himself. The students, who had been terrified prey just moments before, suddenly became something else. Kixnal and the other Vorthik used their forearms to throw multiple rocks at once. Lyra and the Zelani worked together to drive one of the predators toward a rocky outcrop where it couldn't maneuver. Even Zexstar, his warrior pride restored, began fighting with renewed effectiveness. But it was Jake who had become the focal point of the counterattack. He moved through the battle with purpose, always where he was needed most. When one of the predators tried to flank their position, Jake was there to drive it back. When the pack tried to regroup, he disrupted their formation. The creatures, faced with prey that was no longer acting like prey, began to hesitate. Their hunting strategy was based on causing panic and confusion, but their targets were now working together with deadly effectiveness. Jake could see the moment when the pack leader made the decision to retreat. The creature let out a different kind of howl, one that called its packmates back. The predators began withdrawing into the forest, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. The clearing fell silent except for the heavy breathing of the students. They looked around at each other, hardly believing what had just happened. We won, Lyra said, her voice filled with amazement. We survived, Kixnal corrected. But more than that, we learned to fight back. All eyes turned to Jake, who was standing in the center of the clearing, holding a rock in each hand. His clothes were torn and dirty, but his expression was calm and alert. How did you know what to do? Zexstar asked. There was no mockery in his voice now, only genuine curiosity and something that might have been respect. Before Jake could answer, the forest around them flickered and disappeared. They were standing back on the platform in the simulation chamber, with Professor Kylix watching them from the control panel. Simulation complete, the professor announced. Congratulations. You have successfully survived a Class A predator encounter. The students looked at each other, still trying to process what had happened. But Professor Kylix was staring at Jake, with his compound eyes reflecting the lights of the control panel. Human Jake Martinez, the professor said slowly. That was most impressive indeed. Jake felt heat rising in his cheeks. I just did what seemed logical. Professor Kylix moved closer to the platform, his forearms working at different control panels. Logical, perhaps. But more than that, you demonstrated hunting instincts that none of your classmates showed. You read the terrain, predicted predator behavior, and most importantly, you turned a defensive situation into an offensive one. The other students were staring at Jake with expressions he had never seen before. Gone was the polite condescension, the gentle mockery, the assumption that he was somehow less capable than they were. The way you moved through the forest, Kixnell said, his analytical mind clearly working on the problem. You weren't running from the predators. You were hunting them. That's impossible, protested one of the other Vorthix students. Humans don't have hunting adaptations. They're tool users, not natural predators. Professor Kylix made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. Are they not? Tell me, Jake Martinez, what were you thinking during the simulation? Jake considered the question carefully. At first, I was scared like everyone else. But then I started noticing patterns. The way the creatures moved, how they communicated, where they positioned themselves. It reminded me of stories I'd heard. What kind of stories? Lyra asked. Stories about how humans used to hunt on Earth. Before we had advanced technology, we had to face animals that were bigger and stronger than us. We survived by being smarter, by working together, and by never giving up. Zextar's yellow eyes narrowed. But those are just stories. Ancient history. Are they? Professor Kylix asked. He activated another control, and new displays appeared. Around the chamber. Let me show you something interesting. The displays showed data from the simulation, movement patterns, decision-making speeds, and stress responses for each student. Jake's data looked completely different from the others. Notice the diff. The next few days at the Galactic Academy were unlike anything Jake had experienced since his arrival. Word of what had happened in the simulation chamber spread quickly through the student body. Everywhere he went, Jake noticed other students, watching him with new expressions, curiosity mixed with respect, and sometimes a hint of wariness. Professor Kylix had called for a special session of advanced predator studies to discuss the implications of his simulation results. As Jake entered the familiar circular classroom, he saw that it was more crowded than usual. Students from other classes had been invited to observe, and even some faculty members were present. Today, Professor Kylix began, we will examine a predator species that has been largely overlooked by galactic science until recently. We will discuss why this oversight occurred and what it teaches us about the nature of predation itself. Jake took his usual seat, but he noticed that it no longer felt like the back of the room. His classmates' attitudes toward him had shifted dramatically. Zextar nodded respectfully when their eyes met. Lyra smiled warmly, but there was something different in her expression, a new awareness that hadn't been there before. Let us begin with a simple question, the professor continued. What makes a species dangerous? The answers came quickly from the students. Physical strength, natural weapons, speed, intelligence, pack coordination. All the familiar responses they had given in previous classes. All valid answers, Professor Kylix said. But consider this. What if the most dangerous predator is one that doesn't appear dangerous at all? He activated the holographic display, and an image of Jake appeared. In the center of the room. Not Jake as he was now, but as he had been during the simulation, moving through the forest with purpose, coordinating his classmates' defense, turning the tide of the battle. Humans, the professor said simply. A ripple of conversation went through the room. The visiting students looked confused, but Jake's classmates nodded in understanding. I don't understand, said a student Jake didn't recognize, one of the tall, pale beings from another class. Humans have no natural weapons, no enhanced physical abilities. How can they be considered dangerous? Kixenol raised one of his four arms. May I answer that? Professor Kylix gestured for him to continue. Humans are persistence hunters, Kixenol explained to the room. They don't rely on single, overwhelming attacks. Instead, they wear down their prey over time through superior endurance and intelligence. But more than that, they can adapt their hunting strategy during the hunt itself. That's correct, the professor said. But there's something even more significant about human predatory behavior. Jake, would you care to explain what you were thinking during the final phase of the simulation? Jake stood up, feeling the attention of everyone in the room focused on him. A few weeks ago, this would have made him incredibly nervous. Now, he found that he could handle it. I realized that we were thinking about the problem wrong, he said. Everyone was focused on escaping or hiding from the predators. But those creatures were using pack tactics, which meant they had weaknesses that could be exploited. Go on, Professor Kylix encouraged. Pack hunters are strong when they coordinate, but vulnerable when that coordination is disrupted. So instead of running away, I started thinking about how to break their strategy. A Vorthic student from another class clicked rapidly before speaking. But how did you know their coordination could be broken? That level of tactical analysis requires extensive study of pack behavior. Jake considered the question. I didn't really think about it analytically. It just felt right, like I had seen it before. Instinct, Professor Kylix said. Evolutionary programming that runs deeper than conscious thought. Humans evolved alongside pack hunters on their homeworld. They learned to survive by understanding pack dynamics better than the pack hunters themselves. The professor activated new displays showing various Earth predators, wolves, lions, hyenas. Then he showed human hunting groups from different periods of history. Notice the similarities and differences, he said. Like other pack hunters, humans coordinate their efforts and use teamwork. But unlike other pack hunters, humans can modify their strategy in real time based on what they learn about their prey. That's what Jake did in the simulation, Lyra sighed, understanding dawning in her voice. He wasn't just reacting to the attack. He was studying the attackers and developing a counter-strategy. Exactly. And this brings us to the most important point about human predatory behavior. Professor Kylix turned to face the entire room. Humans are not just hunters. They are hunter-killers. The term sent a chill through the classroom. In galactic classification systems, hunter-killers were the most dangerous category of predator. Species that actively sought out and eliminated other predator species. But humans don't seem aggressive, protested one of the visiting students. They're known for being diplomatic and peaceful in their interactions with other species. Jake found himself answering, because we choose to be. Humans learned a long time ago that cooperation works better than constant conflict. But that doesn't mean we've forgotten how to fight. Professor Kylix nodded approvingly. This is what makes humans unique in the galaxy. They have the capability to be apex predators, but they also have the intelligence to know when not to use that capability. The professor brought up more displays, showing Earth's history. Images of humans eliminating dangerous predators to protect their settlements. Evidence of how human expansion had led to the extinction of most large predator species on Earth. Humans didn't just compete with other predators, the professor explained. They systematically eliminated them, not through superior strength, but through superior strategy and an unwillingness to give up. Zextar spoke up from his seat. You're saying that humans are more dangerous than Krathan warriors? The question hung in the air for a moment. Jake looked at the proud reptilian student who had dismissed him so easily just weeks before. Different kind of dangerous, Jake said carefully. Krathan are powerful warriors who fight with honor and strength. Humans are persistent. We don't give up, and we learn from every encounter. To put it in perspective, Professor Kylix said, if a Krathan warrior fought a human in single combat, the Krathan would likely win through superior physical strength. But if that same human survived the encounter and learned from it, the outcome of a second fight would be much less certain. The implications of this statement were not lost on anyone in the room. A species that became more dangerous every time they faced a challenge was unlike anything else in the galaxy. This is why, the professor continued, the Galactic Council decided to invite humans into the galactic community rather than risk them developing space travel independently. A species this adaptable and persistent was better as an ally than as an unknown quantity. Jake felt a surge of pride, but also responsibility. He was representing not just himself, but all of humanity in this room, full of beings from across the galaxy. I have a question, said a new voice. Jake turned to see a student he hadn't met before, one of the fur-covered quadrupeds he had noticed in the dining hall. If humans are such effective predators, why do they seem so normal in everyday situations? Jake smiled. Because being a predator is just one part of who we are. Most of the time, we're students, friends, family members. We only become hunters when we need to. And when do you need to? The student pressed. Jake thought about his sister Lisa back on Earth, about the peaceful life he had lived before coming to the academy, about the choice he had made to represent humanity among the stars. When something we care about is threatened, he said simply. Professor Kylix made that clicking sound that Jake had learned to recognize as approval. Which brings us to the final lesson of today's class. The most dangerous predators are not those who hunt for sport or dominance, but those who hunt to protect. The professor began shutting down the displays, signaling that the class was coming to an end. Your assignment for next week is to research your own species' defensive capabilities and survival strategies. I think you'll find that understanding predators requires understanding what they're willing to fight for. As the students began filing out of the classroom, Jake found himself surrounded by his classmates. But instead of the polite distance he had grown used to, they seemed genuinely interested in talking with him. Jake, Lyra said, would you be willing to help me understand human persistence hunting? I'm writing a paper on adaptive predator strategies. I'd like to know more about human pack coordination, Kixel added. The way you organized our defense in the simulation was unlike anything in our databases. Even Zexstar approached him. Human Jake Martinez, the Krathan said formally. I would be honored to train with you sometime. I think there is much my people could learn from yours. As Jake walked back to his quarters that evening, he felt something he hadn't experienced. Since arriving at the academy, he felt like he belonged. Not as a curiosity or a primitive species that needed protection, but as an equal among the stars. He sat down at his desk and began writing a message to his sister Lisa back on Earth. Dear Lisa, he wrote, you told me to show